because she's or used to be a pro figure skater. So I was like, I definitely want to use that in some way. I mean, it's figure skating. Like, what's more beautiful than that, right? I rented an ice rink for like 1 hour because it's like it's so expensive. But I did, and it looks beautiful. And like, it was honestly, it was like such a beautiful moment. It's like totally dark, and it was just so serenely beautiful. And so it was like, on the one hand, we had this beautiful product, but at the same time, it was like me, the cinematographer, and it was basically this like private show for us. Like,
My name is Vanessa Eve, and I am here today with Inka Winter of ForPlay Films. Inka, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
I'm so glad that we finally get to actually have a chance to sit down and have a conversation, because I feel like this has been a long time coming, just from whenever I met you. So that's a kind of an interesting story of how we met,
Right.
because it was just right before the year of the pandemic in
Right.
January. It was at XBiz LA, and you were just scouting for talent and attending the shows. And there was an opportunity to actually work with you. And I don't know anything about that side of adult as far as the production side. So really having the chance to get more insight about your process and your approach to doing things, it was really eye-opening. So we'll get into all that in a minute. I just wanted to give people a little bit more insight about you and how you got your start in adult. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my profession, or what I went to school for, is fashion design and costume design. So that's really what I've been doing professionally for, as long as I can remember. And well, this is going to be a little bit of a personal story, but that's okay. I had an abortion, like, it's been more than 10 years ago, but basically I lost my sex drive for over a year. And as I was kind of coming into a place where I was at least getting curious about sex again, I was like, what can I do to help me with this? And so I was like, maybe watching porn would help, because that seems what people do. Um, and so I looked on the internet, and I typed like female friendly porn or porn for women. And I mean, also, this is like, again, over 10 years ago. So now I think there's a lot more out there than was that back then. But I just, like, everything that we found, me and my partner, was like, no, this is not making me want to have sex at all. And even though I feel like there's this like physical level on which, even if I see mainstream porn and people actually having sex, there's some kind of like physical turn on, but like at the same time I'm like, this is disgusting, like, mentally. And so then I'm in this place between like physical arousal and mental like disgust, and I'm like, this is also very uncomfortable. um and so I was just like, why isn't anybody making porn for women? And I just sort of like was with that question for a really long time. And I just like asked people and tried to find things. And then, being in the film industry, I was like, why aren't we making this? And I asked my friends, and everybody was just kind of like laughing. Like, haha, that's a cool idea, but like, no.
Did you have an idea of exactly what you were looking for, and that's what you told your friends when you were thinking about doing this?
No, it was kind of like, it really took a few years for me to just sort of like wonder. And then there was actually this moment, and I feel like, as much as I sort of think 50 Shades of Grey is, whatever, but I feel like it opened our mainstream culture to something new, where sort of this a new like component of sexuality was brought into mainstream society. And so then I actually saw a GQ Spain video that was basically like all BDSM, but sensual fashion and no sex, obviously, right? And I saw that and I was like, this is what I want porn to look like. And so then I had this like starting point and this idea, which, you know, in a way it's like interesting because my background is fashion. So editorial photo shoots has been something I've been doing for all my life. And GQ Spain, obviously, that's like a fashion, you know, thing. So I was like, oh yeah, so really what I want is the editorial things that I do to just have sex in them. And so that's sort of how I kind of, at least visually, kind of realized what it is that I want to see. Um, and then from there on, I was like, with this more concrete idea, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do this. And then I, you know, I found some people that would help me do a teaser, and many more things happened after that, but that's basically kind of the starting point.
Had you watched very much porn before that? It's before 10 years ago, before your abortion and everything?
No, I mean, I feel like I've never watched porn, and I think even not watching porn, if you are a human in the world, like you kind of don't get around to seeing what porn looks like, you know, in on the internet, even when you don't seek it out, like you just know, you get to see it in a way, right? But like other than this attempt to actually try to watch porn, I really hadn't made any attempts.
Hmm. But when you did turn to porn, when and that's interesting too, because it's almost like you were utilizing it as more of a tool in that moment of your life versus just purely for
Hmm.
pleasure.
Right, right. And that's kind of like interesting because you know, I don't think about this anymore as much, but that's really how this idea of ForPlay Films and what I do originated, is as a tool for couples, to
Hmm.
bring couples together, um, because obviously a lot of mainstream porn, a lot of women don't want to see. And so making something different that women are also enjoying and men will still enjoy is a way for couples to come together and sort of like respark their sex life. And obviously it's great for people individually, but that was kind of like my original idea, to have this therapeutic aspect to it.
And so, whenever you were getting your crew together, then did you give them a clear idea of exactly what you were looking for or what your objectives were through this, and what was their response to it?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually kind of another funny story, because originally I thought I would just do softcore porn. I thought
Okay.
I would do something like a sex scene in the movie, but just longer and more, you know, elaborate, right? And then that's kind of what I set out to do, the teaser. And I had a female cinematographer that was also a director, who I was just gonna be there to facilitate. But then when it came to the date, she wasn't actually available anymore, and she hooked me up with a different female cinematographer. And then I was like, well, who's gonna direct this? And she's like, you. And I'm like, okay.
Had you had very much experience as far as film and direction?
You know, I've had experience being on set a ton because I do, you know, costume design. Um, and I had made like a handful of like fashion videos just for fun. But I'd never directed anything before in my life. Um,
Let
I
alone people having sex.
Yeah, I mean so
Yeah.
the first teaser did not have sex. It was just people
Oh,
making out and touching. So it was a softcore teaser.
okay.
Um, and so I told you before, I grew up in an artist type commune slash cult. And so I think growing up, filmmaking was part of my life. Like I didn't direct it, but I feel like I've seen a lot about how film comes together from a really early age, and in a very like creative sort of, we don't have much and make like something out of it. Well, I just made this teaser to kind of be like, this is my idea. And what that led to is I had a meeting with back then Kelly Holland from Penthouse, and she wanted to work with me. And so she said to me, well, we are doing softcore and hardcore. Are you okay with that? And I just said, okay. So it was just
Okay.
like this other moment of like me kind of like being in the situation and thinking about it and being like, I think I'm okay with that. But then after leaving the meeting and reflecting on it more, I basically started talking with a lot of women in my life. And I was like, well, this was my idea, but would you want to see explicit content? And everybody was like, yes, if it's shot well. And so I was like, well, that's exactly what I'm here for. So therefore, if that's what women want and I'm trying to make porn for women or whatever, films for women, then I'm okay with that.
So whenever you were talking with Kelly, then was it still like artistically the expectation was it would be done in a very penthouse style, and or did you have full creative direction
No,
with
that was the beauty. I mean, obviously then Pentos went bankrupt and this actually never happened. But from the idea of talking to Kelly, I really loved how she approached it. And the reason she even talked to me is because she liked the teaser and she liked my vision and she liked the editorial thing and she wanted to give me creative freedom and she wanted me to do something that was that kind of vision. So yeah, she wanted basically to bring this vision that I had alive for her company.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And just taking a cursory look at the time, was there very much of that happening within our industry that you saw?
And I hadn't, I mean, I think that's maybe around the time where I became familiar with like Erica Luss and Ex Confessions. And I think, I mean, at that time, as far as I know, that's one of the only ones that did this. I don't know the exact, obviously now I know more companies and I don't know the exact history of everybody. Um, but I want to say Ex Confessions was one of the few things out there at that time. That kind of like never kind of happened. And then basically what I started doing is because I always wanted to do sex education videos as well. So I was like, okay, I don't know how to go about making porn at this point, but I can start doing sex education videos. I'm in LA, there's actors, there's things like, so I started writing scripts for my, I'll put it on my website soon, but it's like a sex education YouTube channel this time. And so I started making those films, and then I submitted one that's called Just Jizz. It's basically like a spoof commercial about semen. I submitted it to the Film Festival. That's Dan
Yeah,
Savage's
Dan
film festival.
Savage.
Yeah, Dan
Uh-huh.
Savage. I'm a big fan. And so that was, I think, 2016. I submitted this film. It got in. And then what actually happened is I went to Portland to see the screening, and I had become part of this sort of like Burning Man sex positive group of friends, and I met up with them to go see the film the festival. And so I talked to them and I was like, what I really want to do is porn. And so they were, they're sort of in the swinger poly community. They're all kind of like, slightly exhibitionist and just very open.
Open. Yeah.
And so somebody was like, yeah, I'd be in the film. And she's like, I will be in LA in January and my partner's there, and yeah, we'll shoot with you. My first shoot, I was actually like, the reason I like talking about it because I think it was just so beautiful. And ahead of time, I was actually really nervous. I was super scared because, yeah, I've never, done this before. And then this other aspect I kind of mentioned briefly, me growing up in a cult, it was actually, sex happened there a lot with not good boundaries. So as a child, I was exposed to things I shouldn't have been exposed to. So I also was really, really scared that I would show up and potentially have a panic attack and really kind of have my trauma triggered in a way. But I'm the kind of person who's like, okay, this could happen, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm just going to see what happens. So, so I showed up. And then I noticed that me being in charge and being behind the camera was really the opposite of the trauma that I've experienced, because I had control over things, and nothing is like thrust upon me that I wasn't okay with. So in that moment, I figured out that what like doing what I'm doing is actually in a way empowering me in a way to deal with my past trauma. And so that was something that was really beautiful. And then at the same time, so my friend, her partner, and this partner has another partner. So she invited the second partner. So it was three people.
Okay.
I had expected two. There was three. It was great. And what was so beautiful is like there was so much love on set. And it was really everybody by the end of the day like pointed it out, because I think we as the crew, it was me, the female cinematographer, like a couple of like my like female friends helping, um and then the three of them who they're polyamorous, so they're really good about communication. And so all throughout the day they were communicating and checking in with each other about what was okay for them, and we were there just sort of like holding space for them and just being there. And honestly, it's still in that terms, I think, one of my favorite shoots like ever. And yeah, I think I just think love was there, and that's just what was so beautiful about it. Yeah,
They set the bar pretty high then with that first shoot.
they did. They did.
Yeah.
They did. Yeah. It's called
Okay.
Undressed. It's like a
Addressed.
threesome in a shower. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's actually how it started. That's sort of like me working with couples is how I started in this industry, because that was kind of what came to me. Um, and I really I'm very appreciative of that, because my vision about everything being like sensual and chemistry and connection with a couple, I didn't have to tell them what that meant, because they already had that. And so I think for me, later on when I started working with industry talent who on set are just kind of used to a little bit more performative, and that's what they're told to do. So it was really good for me to have this experience and this sort of like this time that I spent working with couples to know exactly what I wanted, and to take that and use that with adult talent. So that I feel like really was the best way that all of this could have started for me.
From the time that you started with that first couple that were your friends,
Mhm.
and then until you started working with more like mainstream industry talent, what was the timeline of that?
I want to say that the first couple was the beginning of 2017. And then I actually did wardrobe for a Lust Cinema shoot. And I want to say that was sort of like mid 2019. Dana Vespoli directed it, like, love her, so great. And when I was on set, is really the first time I met adult talent. And so starting to talk to them and sort of like figure out what people want, and getting to know some of them. And also at this time, like, so I'm a person, like, I don't have funding, I don't have backing, I'm not a studio, I'm just like a person with a vision, right? So the other aspect was like, how can I even like financially make this work? And so then I found out on set with everybody that everybody does content trade. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, would you guys be interested for me to produce it and sort of like edit it and sort of give this look to it? And I showed them, photos from what I've done, and everybody was like, oh, this is amazing, yes. And so that's when I met my first, adult talent. And yeah, that's sort of how that started.
In the mainstream porn world, and even with indie porn as well, is it important for people to have a portfolio to kind of show their range, I guess, as maybe more traditional actors or even models that kind of mainstream talent do?
So basically, like with content trade, the beauty of OnlyFans and these sites is that now talent can monetize their own content, which wasn't possible before those sites came along, right? Like before, if you're a talent, you can go and, shoot something, get a paycheck, and then that's it, right? So you have to rely on studios to hire you. Now with OnlyFans and all these places, you can be your own boss, make your own money, have your channel, have your fans, and monetize content. And so that's really how that works. And so it's like talent meets up with each other and they shoot stuff and then they monetize it on their individual like OnlyFans and ManyVids and whatever the
Yeah.
sites are. Yeah.
Okay, so even with content trades, when you were working with talent, then they could still utilize this content and put it on their channels and monetize it
Exactly.
directly.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
Exactly. And it's kind of funny because I think a lot of the talent that I work with, they have like a huge following and they're like much more established in the industry. So I think in the end they're going to make a lot more money with the thing that I produce than I will. But it's, obviously it's totally like, and then it depends. Yeah, it just depends on the talent and what their fan base is.
Okay, and I'm digging here,
Mm,
but this is interesting too because I think that this is maybe part of the business side of adult that we don't really talk about. So
mm.
there's now awareness that there's content trades. Um, is that limited to only like a certain caliber of talent, or have you found that talent just across the board, regardless of if they've, how big their following is or how, new they are to the industry? Is everyone pretty open to this so long as it's the right opportunity?
I mean, I really don't think that I can generalize that.
In
Um,
your experience, I guess.
in my experience, there's a lot of willingness, but I do think that also is because the content that I produce is high quality. And I think it's definitely for talent, it's very important that it is the right opportunity and sort of that's sort of the decision that they're making.
So when it comes to the collaboration involved, and can you walk us through your
Mm,
process and
mm.
what that looks like?
There's so many reasons. I think one reason is just that I want to do things this way, but because I want it to be about pleasure and intimacy and chemistry, I feel like the more that the talent is involved in creating something that they're into, the more pleasure and joy there is all around. So I think just in itself, this working and collaborating with talent is in the end also good for the product, I think. Um, and I think it's great for the talent to have a voice and to kind of express who they are. And especially if you do content trade, it needs to fit their vision and their channel and their brand, so I feel like it's also really like great for them. um so I start talking with somebody. Usually I start with the female talent and I ask her who she wants to film with, so she gets to choose the partner or partners, on screen. And then I ask her if she has a vision or if there's like something specific she wants to do. And so sometimes, there's a vision or an idea. And if there isn't, then I ask, is there just a style that you like, 1920s, or, just something that makes the talent feel like, oh, this is really like what I'm into. And then I'm also asking them like maybe there's a like a talent that you have outside of the industry, like for example Jada, I don't know how, Kai, I'm like
Oh,
never sure how to pronounce
Kai.
Kai, because I always want to pronounce it kind of like German and I'm like, wait.
How's it pronounced in German?
I don't know. I feel like it just would say something more K or something, but Kai. Anyway,
Okay.
so Jada Kai is a great example because she's or used to be a pro figure skater. So I was like, I definitely want to use that in some way. I mean, it's figure skating. Like, what's more beautiful than that, right? And so we came up with a concept around that, and I rented an ice rink for like 1 hour because it's like it's so expensive. But I did, and it looks beautiful, and like it was honestly, it was like such a beautiful moment because it was like So we turned all the lights off and we just had like one follow beam,
Uh-huh.
which I had my roommate come out with me and do it. She was great.
So you had to rent us like a spotlight.
They had that. They had the
Oh, they had a
spotlight, the ring.
spotlight.
Yes, that
Oh,
like I think without that
nice.
would have been a problem, right? So she was doing the follow light and Jada was like doing the figure skating and was like totally dark and it was just so serenely beautiful. And so it was like on the one hand we had this beautiful product, but at the same time it was like me, the cinematographer, and it was basically this like private show for us, like of something that like everybody, I mean, like who doesn't love like a great figure skating, like oh my god. So I feel like yeah, there's just so many like cool and fun things that we get to explore together, you know, because it's their passion, the talent, and their talent, and yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing that people are allowed to make it uniquely their own and put their own signature on it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
Lotus Lane was kind of calling it create your own fantasy. I was like, that's exactly, or
Yeah.
create your own adventure. And I feel like I think it's great for everybody, but I feel like especially when it's content trade, I feel like it just feels better if it's, you know, something that they're really involved in and into, you know.
Yeah.
Mm.
So do you get the sense then that that really isn't something, that kind of involvement on the talent end, that's not as prevalent in our industry?
Yeah, I don't know that anybody else does that. Because I mean, I do every time I work with somebody, they're like, really excited about it, and I do feel like they've never done that before unless they go out and do their own content, which, you know, usually is, you know, not as like elaborate. So I don't think that anybody else does this.
So is it an all-female um, crew then with ForPlay Films?
Yeah, I mean, I think all female or mostly female, you know, like there's like I have female cinematographers, but every once in a while when there's, you know, they're not available, like I have some male friends as well who do that. I think it's sort of all female, like people of color, LGBTQ. I think it's just sort of like trying to be more exclusive and then maybe not just exclusive, but geared towards, you know,
Yeah.
the other
Do,
side. For me, it's like the cinematographer, like because English works in only one gender. It's just like, okay, well, the female cinematographer. Because you know, in German you can say the cinematographer and make the word itself female, so it's like, hey, wait, that doesn't work. The female cinematographer that I work with mostly, she has a really wide range, and you know, so she works for everything. It's more like if she's not available, if she's booked on something else, you know, then
Mhm.
I use somebody else. But you know, the first, I don't know how, the first like 15 to 20 I shot mostly with one person, and she now kind of like has a more steady job, so now I have another female cinematographer that I shoot with mostly. Yeah, so that's how it's been. I have like female editors. When I do bigger productions, because I also direct and produce for Lust Cinema, it's been like basically all department heads are female, but we have, you know, like a gaffer or a grip that's male, so it's not like um you know, we don't allow men on set or something like that, right? It's just that
Yeah.
all the lead positions are usually women.
Okay, okay. And that was intentional. People,
Yes,
yeah, yeah, that
yes,
was very
yes,
important.
yes. Yeah, I mean, on so many levels. Like, first of all, like, you know, whatever, my product is by women for women. So if it's by women, like, obviously that has to kind of go through the whole department. And then it's just the male gaze and the way men do things, it sort of impacts everything, right? So it's, you want women in these like creative positions. And then, to be honest, there's a lot about teamwork that works much better with women. We have these conversations sometimes, and my friend, like when we prep stuff and she's like worried about something, and I was like, remember, we're an all-female crew. Somebody's going to do it, you know, because I feel like with men, it's more the experience like, oh yeah, that's not my job, I'm not doing it. If you have women around and they see something needs to be done, somebody's going to do it. It's just the teamwork is a whole other like level of teamwork. Like women usually aren't like as egocentric where it's like, no, I need it to be this way, you know. So it's also like the collaboration where you're like, I have a vision, but I'm totally open to have the cinematographer give me like not just input, but be like, this is how it should be done, right? But if there's moments where I'm like, I really want to do this, she's not going to argue with me about it. And I've been in situation with men when they're like, and I'm like, okay, I am the director, this is my vision, really I have to argue with you about this?
In your experience, like how have the males on set, the male talent, I mean, how has their experience been, just from what you can see? Is this something that's much different for them? What do you think the benefit is for male talent working on an all-female set?
So I think with male talent, I do also talk to male talent ahead of time. And there's been also moments where I made a scene and did a project that started off with the male talent and it was kind of, you know, like they brought on a female talent and whatnot, right? But I do talk with them ahead of time. So all of this, what is expected, what are the boundaries, are just kind of like more clear. And then I think the way that we shoot in general is no camera angles. It's all about pleasure. So I think just this freedom that is there for the talent to just express themselves, who they are sexually and whatnot, is there for both male and female, because it's just really all about being authentic in the moment. And I mean, we're also like a small crew. I mean, I'm just going to assume that like for men, it's just also just fun to kind of have this very like soft and chill environment. But I guess we'd have to ask them.
Yeah, because I'd imagine, or just the male talent that I've spoken with in the past, there seems to be this enormous amount of pressure.
Mhm.
And so from the sound of it on your set, it's just a much different, it's very much more organic and go with the flow and focusing on sensuality versus just like that hardcore explicit.
And I think I did have one conversation with Nathan Bronson about sort of like that generally, and he definitely mentioned to me that there is less pressure on my sets for sure.
So what do you feel? I mean, I think we've seen, especially over the past couple of years, more of like the female or feminine oriented porn, you know, out there across our industry. What do you think, as far as the future of this style? How do you also see it fitting into in terms of just porn and adult content in general?
I actually think that the existence of this is actually starting to influence mainstream porn as well. I see bigger studios adjusting to having more, you know, like a little bit more like cinematography, sensuality and whatnot in there. But I also think, you know, this genre goes hand in hand with a lot of behind the scenes stuff. That's why, you know, this whole idea of ethical porn, technically ethical porn doesn't have to look a certain way. It doesn't have to be about the female pleasure or whatnot per se. It just means that everybody has to be treated better, fairly, you know. And I think that's something that is starting to come into the industry in a different and stronger way. I think that because there's something else, like you can't get away as much with kind of doing things in like a shitty way, you know, because now there's choices and talent has more power to say, no, I don't want to work for this company because they don't do things right, because there's other companies that do it better, and because now they have OnlyFans and whatnot, and they can monetize and make their own content, so they're not as reliant on studios anymore. So I think there's an overall like pressure, and I think reason for the porn industry to just become more, let's just call it ethical for the sake of argument. And I think a lot of it did start with having this different approach, which, you know, like for me and like lust cinema and whatnot, it's just consent is, you know, super important, like having conversations, making boundaries known, talent being able to say no to things. So it's just something that's gonna, I think, influence the entirety of the industry. I mean, at least the above board industry. There's obviously other stuff, you know, but here in LA, you know, there's a above board industry where people, you know, do things a certain way, and that's definitely being influenced by that. Yeah.
As a female in this industry, female porn, ethical, it's not, I guess, at this time while we're sitting here, not exactly what our industry is known for. So is that kind of daunting to you as, you know, a solo female entrepreneur, essentially, kind of carving this way through an industry that has done things for just so long and is mostly, you know, represented by men?
I mean, I think it's kind of exciting to be sort of at the forefront and sort of, you know, what this new genre is. And I think there is obviously like Erica Lust and Lust Cinema and a few others that have been carving out a way that is actually nice to be able to follow and sort of like have this direction. And I think there's definitely a good amount of people in this industry, other women, where I can call them and sort of like, you know, get advice. But at the same time, like I think that was actually so XBiz in Berlin. I was on a panel representing Lust Cinema, and it was me and three, like, you know, older white men that have been in the industry for a really long time. And it was very interesting, and I felt kind of like an alien, but at the same time, it was really, if you'd never heard the difference of anything, different porn genres before, and you just had seen this panel, you'd have been like, oh yeah, like I see the difference, right? And it was very exciting, like when I started talking and everybody else was starting talking and the difference became so clear and so stark. That's when I was like, oh, I'm so happy I'm here. Like
Yeah.
I wasn't sure, like I was just going to be on a panel, I didn't think about it, but in that moment I was like, ah, this needed to be. And like people from the audience told me after and whatnot. So I feel like it's exciting to kind of like hopefully influence. And you know, that's why I'm here for in the first place, is because there is like a part of wanting to change things. It's a social activism. I consider what I do social activism, right? So yeah, it's exciting to hopefully have an influence on how things are done, change the landscape of porn.
So aside from that, I know that we've kind of touched on your work within the community as far as more of therapy work.
Mm.
So can you talk a little bit about what
Mhm.
that's all about and what your
Mhm.
involvement is with that?
Yeah, so I've been like a mindfulness practitioner for a really long time, and I've recently kind of started volunteering as a counselor at a nonprofit here in LA. So I see clients under supervision, have clinical skills training and whatnot. So I'm not getting my license, but I'm kind of doing the same thing. Like I'm working under another therapist's license. And it's something that I started doing because I myself have experienced a lot of trauma, and I've worked on this for such a long time, and I felt like I've developed tools that I can share with people. And so that's like one way of doing that. But then at the same time, I'm bringing that into my erotic work as well in a few different ways. First of all, like I'm going to do like desire and arousal coaching for, you know, anybody. Secondly, like I've also worked with talent on that, like before shoots, during shoots, here and there. So I bring that into like the actual filming. And then the other thing that I've done is like I've shot actual like um tantric meditations, like before, like as part of a sex scene. It started with a tantric meditation and then it's a sex scene. Or I wrote a guided mindfulness masturbation and filmed it, and the audio is going to be available on the website so you can download it and do it. But I also shot it as a scene. So I'm kind of bringing that into what I do on screen. And then I'm also currently like working on this coursework that's sort of exploring your sexuality.
Why do you feel that this is necessary then for talent or just for individual, just
Mm,
regular people?
yeah. So I'm starting to call what I do holistic pornography. And I see it as, you know, sexuality is only enjoyable if your relationship works, if your trauma about sexuality has been dealt with, if your religious guilt is has been dealt with, right? So sexuality is something that's so far larger than two bodies and genitals, right? So in order to enjoy sex and have healthy sex, education, therapy, all of those things are part of us being able to enjoy sex fully.
In your opinion, and I don't know if you're dating or what have you, but um, do you find that there's a disconnect then for a lot of people when it comes down to expressing themselves sexually?
I mean, I think I guess is the answer. I think for me personally, because you like, you know, mentioned me dating, I think I've just been lucky or good at choosing like men, because that's who I have sex with, that are, you know, in tune and you know, do the things like, you know, in a more connected way. But I definitely think our society at large is hugely disconnected from really
Yeah.
most things. So yeah.
And I guess that's why it works then for a lot of the porn historically that we've seen, because there is that
Hmm.
disconnect and it's just kind
Absolutely.
of, it's
Yep.
pervasive in that way.
Yep. Exactly.
Wow.
Because the viewer is disconnected. So what they're viewing also makes sense to be disconnected for sure. Yeah.
Wow. So what can people expect to see then whenever they are viewing one of your
Hmm.
productions? What can they expect to see or feel?
I mean, on the visual level, you know, obviously sort of the more cinematic and editorial approach. And then story wise, like I don't have like huge stories. It's usually just kind of a storyline that leads to sex. So for me, it's like I want to create a context for sex, because to me, sex always happens in a context, right? And just having like people show up and then there's sex is just like weird. It's like, because that's not how life works, right? So I just want to create an authentic context for sex. And so the storyline is just sort of like creating this context so that when the sex starts, you're not just sort of like this jarring, like, why are they having sex? This makes no sense, you know? So
Yeah.
so you're kind of like led into the sex via a very like subtle story. And then like for the sex itself, there's, you know, it's definitely about real pleasure, it's about connection, chemistry, you know, that's, you know, why I have talent choose who they want to shoot with, to have that be the most authentic that it can be. And then we put female pleasure first, which I feel like ideally in sex, at home sex, that's just how it is anyway. You know, I feel like all the sex that I'm having with men is like that. It's not like a man has to compromise their pleasure if he puts the woman first. In my experience, men get off on women experiencing pleasure.
Mhm.
So it's sort of a win-win. Make the woman have pleasure and your pleasure will grow exponentially. So there's no like either or. It's just more like everybody has more pleasure if everybody actually has pleasure. So so that, and then we do some educational stuff sort of depending on the film, like here and there, like I've done some narration that's a little bit sort of explaining things. We just shot something with Sage the Flame and April Rain, that like where they're literally stopping and what they're doing, they're explaining what they're doing and they're kind of describing what they're feeling. So I'm really excited for that. And like overall, there's just like a little bit of educational stuff here and there, like not sort of in your face, but just like subtly, you know.
Yeah, a little nuanced. It's so refreshing to hear too, and understand more about the why behind
Mm,
why you do things the way that you do,
mm,
and really seeing you like infuse your
mm,
work with that purpose. So what do you see for the future of ForPlay Films, and also just what would you like to see as far as your continued involvement
mm.
in adult?
Yeah. I mean, I think just, obviously as a company, like there needs to be some growth just to kind of be able to do all the things that I want to do and to make it sort of sustainable. So that's sort of like on a financial aspect, just something that needs to happen and I'm hoping will happen. And then I think yeah, just continuing to make these films. Like next year, I want to do a few more um story heavier films, like maybe do our first feature film, um, and then continue this sort of having more meditations and all of that stuff, doing the sensuality work and just expanding on that and making that accessible on the website. Yeah, all of those things are what I'm hoping to achieve.
Ethics is really big, taking an ethical approach to content.
Hmm.
Even if independent creators wanted to do this and put it into practice, could you lend out some advice for independent content creators to be more ethical, what they can do
Yeah.
as far as their approach?
I think, in life, everything is about communication, and it's about communicating your needs and listening to the other person's needs. And since everybody is different, I think ethical can't be defined as, there's some things that can be sort of like said this and this and that, but overall, when it comes down to, it's about consent and boundaries, and those can only happen if there's communication.
Mhm.
So you have to clearly communicate what you want and also listen and then respect what the other person needs and their boundaries. And I think if that's sort of in a nutshell what it's about.
Thank you so much, Inka, for taking the time and telling us all about, foreplay. And if people want to check out your work, where can they go to find that?
Yeah, it's www.forplayfilms.com, and it's for FOR play PLAY. So it's a play on words, where instead of foreplay with the E, it's foreplay.
Sipping something sweet with the loveliest girl. Who knew dreams like this came true?
I did see one with, I think it was called The Key,
Yeah, the key
or
party.
The
Yeah.
Key Party.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really love the aesthetic, but also, sorry, I'm getting off track
Oh, yeah.
here,
It's
but
okay.
just the set design itself, which by the way, I was curious about that, and I guess I didn't ask you about it, but I loved it. Like it just blended with your theme so
Oh,
perfectly.
this was my friend bought a house in Portland and he posted it on Facebook, and it was literally like that. It was from the 70s. He bought it with all of the
Oh,
thing intact. And as
uh-huh.
soon as I saw him posted it, I was like, hey, I need to film there. And he was like, yes. And so it's that. So yeah.
How do you choose your, how does that work? As far as sets these days, because I know that that's kind of a tricky thing in LA. If like
I feel like we shouldn't talk about this because I feel like I'm doing everything above board, but it's also sort of, I don't really want people.
you don't want everyone to know you're okay, we won't give away your
Yeah,
secrets,
yeah,
but
exactly. Well, also just anyway, it's just it's because it's so hard. It's so hard. So